So to look at that, the museums as a space where the digital takes space and what happens with it in the museum. And that includes an engagement with the massive database that we try to create, understand, to document, and to share with our different publics, and to think about a refiguring of what the documentation system means for how we articulate with our publics.
So how can we remember the digital age? What will be left of its future? Should museums take responsibility and care for digital heritage? Within this conference, this question will be approached from two angles. The first is quite concrete. What could be interesting for the Anthropological Museum to collect? Which part of digital culture is relevant for these museums? So we can give present and future generations ideas about what our digital age comprehends.
In order to shift from a museum practice in which objects are central to a practice that emphasizes processes, museums should rethink their definitions of objects and their materiality, and the value system that underlies these definitions. Despite efforts to increase attention and acknowledgement for immaterial heritage, museum culture is still highly object-centered. This object-centeredness is related to the prevailing importance of values such as aura, authenticity, and originality, and the idea that these values are intrinsically linked to an object's materiality.
Practically no one understands what digitality is. One thing that digitality certainly is not is zeros and ones. The almost universal representation of digital code as zeros and ones is in fact a mere metaphor. Ones and zeros are stored digitally, but as codes, not as ones and zeros. Something much messier and more interesting is being created when we create digital signals. This is the pattern of the digital. It is not binary. It is not numbers. It is not mathematical. It is merely the simplest of presences and absences, a synchronous series of something there or something not there, electronically on, off, on. This simplicity is critical to understanding the digital, I would argue. The simplicity of digital encoding is not only foundational to its entire genealogy, but it is also critical to understand the medium that we work with today. Because the digital is not numbers, it is not ontologically numeric. It is not ontologically mathematical. It is not ontologically computational. Right? Computers are not called computers because they compute, but that's a different story.
On the right-hand wall there, you'll see a piece of work called Madam I by Beverly Hood, which originally was a web-based piece of work, but we remediated it. So it became a short video for mobile phone and was actually pushed by Bluetooth to the audience as they were coming in. But when it came to the main gallery, we actually had to ask the artists, some of them, to actually revisit their web-based practice and actually consider it from a gallery perspective. So the three pictures that you see on the wall here is a reinvention of Sunbed City by Mandy McIntosh.
Help, our digital heritage is getting lost. And this is the urgency why we do it. In 2003, the UNESCO already wrote a chapter how to preserve our digital heritage. Brewster Kahle, you know, of the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive, started in '96. So some parts of the digital city are there, but as we know, the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive, makes snapshots, make photos. So small representations of the website, but not all. And Brewster Kahle said, well, the web was not designed to be preserved. And that is what we have to give our future creators and future developers, how to create a website which can be preserved. If we have the data, where will we put it and how to manage it? And that's completely new. But then now I'll take you back to the digital city. It was the first virtual city in the world. And it was the first online community in Holland. So pre-Facebook, even pre-Hives. And it brought internet to the public. So if you were not a military or studying at the academics, you could now enter internet. What do we want? REDDS, it means the reconstruction of the digital city. We want to keep the internet historical monument, as we call it, and map the history. And as well, this is a pilot for web archaeology, because how do you do that? The website's no longer online. Where is it? And then, if you have data, what to do with it?
What we did over the past 3 years was trying to investigate the process of datafication, mostly in the areas of public administration and politics. We want to see what is happening when our everyday data are increasingly used for analysis processes, when what we speak online, what we do in public space, the way we move, is structurally collected and used for all kinds of analysis. There is no policy how to deal with data sets, also quite scary, coming from someone who on a daily basis works with data sets, thinking about how can I connect data sets on school skippers with the socio-economical background of their parents or social welfare programs, and how can I prevent that? How can I trace patterns and preemptively intervene with potential school skippers, school dropouts? I'm deeply convinced that data analysis is the future of journalism, also raising quite some serious questions to what extent we assign truth to data sets and the hope that is expressed in using those techniques as truth manufacturing. There are a number of things, and I just want to mention two. Within academia, it means that we really have to think about the ethical guidelines for internet research, something that is hardly developed yet. I have this little flyer in my office about how to do proper research, and it covers not 5% of the issues I'm confronted with on a daily basis. To what ends? The objectives. Are we actually collecting these data sets? Are we just doing that as l'art pour l'art because we can, which is possible, and my students love to do it, and they like to surprise me with saying, hey, look what I've done, I just scraped 100,000 profiles from a forum without asking informed consent. And yes, that's possible, and it raises a lot of issues that we really have to address. Then, how can we archive them? I can ask Thomas, do you share your data set of the last tweets you collected? And I see him sweating already. I would do the same. It is not that easy. How can we share those data sets? Actually, are we allowed to reuse the data sets in that way? Do we have to anonymize the sets before sharing them?
I think the message which which comes out of these presentations, and which will also come out of my presentation, is how incredibly important it is to be self-reflexive in how we analyze, how we collect, how we potentially also curate these data. So working with social media data means that the available options for analysis are already for a large extent predefined. So the available options for analysis are already to a large extent predefined. So many projects studying online activity, in particular those following a classic sort of waterfall type research strategy, where the inquiry starts with a particular research question, they're quite unsuitable for this type of data collection through APIs. At least not without finding additional data to actually address those kind of questions, because you're provided with very specific data elements which only require you to produce particular types of insights.
We are today interested in the question of preservation, right? So should museums preserve these kind of images? I know you are quite critical of a museum taking this as a poster and saving it in some archive. What's your view on that?
What I like to keep from my works and what I like to see in the future, like saving by my works, is to see a momentum which ordinary people do something extraordinary. And I think this is something that we have to keep for the future.
I was wondering if you kept track of how often your drawings have been used, shared, printed.
I did try several times to keep the trace, but it's almost impossible, especially about the works which are related to other countries and other languages. Like, for instance, about Kurdistan, my works were perfectly distributed in Turkish networks. I couldn't really reach all of them because I could not read Turkish. And also about other Arab countries, when it goes to language boundaries, I cannot really trace my works.
I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about the relation of like the physical public sphere where they are used and their circulation in the digital public sphere. Do you think they have more impact when people really carry them in the streets, or do you see at least the same importance for all the circulation in the social networks?
Yeah, definitely. I think social networks are never as strong as public space, and social networks are only extra addition to public space. And when my work goes to public space, that's a moment that my work has a voice, actually. But of course, social networks make it much more possible and much more easy for us nowadays to just suddenly appear somewhere far with our works.
Actually, whilst preparing for this talk, I remembered an article that I read a couple of months ago in the New Yorker about the question whether the internet can be archived. It started actually with the case of the Malaysian Airlines flight crash in the Ukraine. Probably still remember that, in June 2014. And merely 2 weeks before the crash, a curator of the Russia and Eurasian collection at the Stanford, at the Hoover Institution at Stanford in the US, has submitted to the Internet Archive a list of Ukrainian and Russian websites and also blogs that ought to be recorded as part of the archive. And really to remember the Ukrainian conflict. And so they did. And luckily, I have to say as well, because that way they intercepted and recorded a screenshot of a VK contact. It's a social network. It's a post by Strelkov, a field commander in Slavyansk, about putting down a plane. Within 2.5 hours, though, that tweet was deleted. Oh, well, it wasn't a tweet, but similar to a tweet, and edited out. However, though, the Internet Archive did indeed capture that post, so there is an evidence of the original claim in the Wayback Machine. Rhizome has been around for 20 years, although not everyone knows it. Probably here also a few of you know it, but not everyone, I suppose. But it has a huge archive of net art, internet art, however you want to call it. Now, recently they've started experimenting with different ways to capture content on the web. More specifically, they developed a social media archiving tool. So this is an action that I've been calling sort of network of care, where people, organizations gather around something and start copying it, start preserving it in different ways, distributing it, copying it. Now, in a very similar way, Italian curator Domenico Carenta has said the following, that in a digital age, archiving and collecting are no more just an act connected with power, institution, and authority. People can be involved in what they choose to save on their hard disks.